Good morning and welcome to the Point. Just this past week, Governor Rick Snyder made his endorsement for the governor's race in 2018. And to nobody's surprise, he endorsed Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley. We're pleased to have both the governor and Lieutenant Governor with us here this morning. Thank you for doing this, and I'm going to start with you, Governor. There was no particular secret that you were backing the Lieutenant Governor. You've appeared with him a number of times, including, I think, on the day that you announced that you were running for governor. But why did you choose this moment?
Well, I think it was the right time. If you look at it, a couple things. One is that campaigns are really heating up. We're getting close enough now where our citizens are paying much more attention to the race. If it would have been done much earlier, it could have just been another day worth of news, where this is very important to me. And it's very exciting for me, Rick. This is amazing. If you think about it, this is something I hoped I would have this day happen 8 years ago. And that was part of the process about asking Brian to be my lieutenant governor. He had a great background then in terms of private sector experience, legislative experience, being a great guy. But asking him to be my partner in this, he's really earned this opportunity, in my view, for the great work he's done over the last 8 years as lieutenant governor. He's been an active partner in making wonderful things happen in terms of getting rid of the Michigan business tax, in terms of job creation. We've done these balanced budgets. He's been doing the budget with me and the presentations, and that's 7 years in a row. In addition to that, though, it's the human side of things. He's been a point person for us in terms of working with people with disabilities, with people with addictions, with mental health challenged people, and really understanding it's everything from the economy to the personal level, about how we help people. I think he's earned it. And I think he'd be a fabulous governor, and I think we're in a great spot. The foundation's been built. That's what I've tried to achieve in my time, is to say, let's solve a lot of the historical problems. Let's get Michigan on the comeback to happen. We're back. Now let's go to the next level. And we have a great person here that can succeed me, that can take us higher and better than I would have done.
By my count, you have run 5 elections, is that right? 3 times for the House and twice for as Lieutenant Governor?
No, twice in the House.
Twice.
Yep.
Okay. So this, by far, will be the biggest undertaking for you. What do you think that the endorsement from the sitting governor says at this point in the race?
Well, first of all, I'll say at a personal level, it means so much to me, because if anybody knows the type of work that I've done and would have kind of the inside scoop of what my capabilities are, it would be Governor Snyder. And as we move forward in bringing our state to the next level, understanding how far we've come with 540,000 new jobs and hitting a 17-year low in unemployment last year, along with a top 10 state, becoming a top 10 state in income growth. This is the opportunities in front of us now to take it to the next level and build on this strong foundation are amazing. And I count it really an honor to have the support of the governor that provided that vision and the leadership that our state needed coming out of the lost decade. And who would have thought, Rick, just this many years later, that our state would be a leader in so many ways? And right here in West Michigan, I think the story is told just by looking around, and the activity and the growth and demand for people and the economic strength that is in the strength of our communities. This is a perfect picture of the Michigan comeback. But now that we are back, the question is, where do we go from here? And I have what it takes to bring Michigan to the next level.
This is a conversation that I've been looking forward to since I realized I was going to have this opportunity. Obviously, we're talking about an election, we're talking about a campaign, but we're also talking about a state. We're talking about the long-term future of a place that has been the product of boom and bust economies for, well, longer than I can remember. That's just kind of been the cycle. And you talked about this on the campaign trail now 8 years ago when you were campaigning, and you said that the economy was going to change, that some jobs were not going to come back. We have come back with manufacturing jobs, but they're different, aren't they?
Yeah, they're absolutely. And we should be proud of that, though. We've led the nation in the creation of manufacturing jobs, but it's much more higher skill in terms of the positions that are required. The experience you need, the training you need. Now you're talking about robotics technicians, industrial automation specialists. And what I would say, Rick, and that's why I view having a next generation leader like Brian is really important, is the rate of change isn't going to slow down in our world. We've gone through this phase of saying there wasn't a job in Michigan to saying now you need the skills to be successful for that great well-paying job. And we've also dealt with a lot of historical problems that we had had for 40, 50 years. Now that we've got a position where we can look towards the future, let's get the next generation with all the experience that you could ask for leading us there. To be prepared to take on those challenges, to deal with how mobility is going to change our life, autonomous and connected vehicles. We're the world's leader, but we need to keep those things up. And we actually have even more opportunity than I believe most places in the world because of how we're positioned today. Let's take advantage of that and let's lead.
You're talking about the skill level and that high end when you talk about robotics and automation and all of those things. Mobility, one of the things you talk about. Lieutenant Governor, one of the things we continue to hear about, notwithstanding some of the things that have happened in the state, is we're still struggling when it comes to reading levels and some of those achievements that we have to get at the very beginning. We have to, get for the little kids to be able to read by the time they're in the third grade at a proficiency level that they can begin to learn. And that kind of feeds into that job market as well. What do we have to do about that?
The reason I've made the K-12 system and in the Marshall Plan for talent the top two priorities of this campaign and the top two priorities for our state is because this really is everything. Talent is the new currency of economic development. That's what economic growth is built on. That's how you defeat poverty. That's how you reduce crime, is to make sure that every kid learns how to read, and every individual as they grow into adulthood have all the skills that they need to go out there and compete and win in a 21st century global economy. So if you look back just a few years, we've made substantial investments in two key areas, but those investments are very, very recent yet. There's early childhood education, trying to make that universal with Great Start Readiness, for example, across communities in our state, and then also the pre-third grade reading initiative, which is really in many ways still in implementation now. So this is so important. We've also made changes in even the way that we evaluate how many and how well our kids are reading. In other words, our standards are tougher than they used to be in what we consider to be proficient. And all of these things working together will make a difference, but we do have to provide more support for teachers. And one of the areas that I think that we can make a big difference in yet is helping good teachers to become great teachers and great teachers to become even greater teachers, by getting the latest and the greatest in best practices and research, particularly for how you teach kids that have non-educational barriers to learning, kids that are growing up in poverty, kids that have a very particular set of challenges, the world stacked against them, but we still need to make sure that they read. And when we accomplish that, the impact that it has on all the rest of the issues that face our society, the impact will be profound.
When you talk about budgeting, and the governor mentioned it just a moment ago, I can't help but remember some of those long nights over in the State House when the government was in a financial bind and it seemed that there were no good answers. As it turned out, there probably weren't very many good answers, and you had to marshal along as best you could. Explain the difference to me now, what it's like when you sit down with the governor to do this budget with your colleagues in the House and Senate. Obviously, the state, because of the economy and some other things, is in much better shape than it was then. What will it look like, regardless of who the next governor is? What will that budget look like for the new administration?
Well, the changes, the cultural changes in the process that's what is most significant. And I'm very pleased that the expectations, the bar has been raised. Before, if you got it done before September 30th, literally the last day of the fiscal year, it was considered to be early. Now, 4 months early is the new on time. In fact, if a budget got done in July, we'd really, in a lot of ways, we consider that to be late by our standards. But it's also the quality of the budget. It's having it balanced for real. No smoke and mirrors, no accounting gimmicks, but actually balanced while dealing with the long-term liabilities. So this administration has provided so much leadership on fiscal responsibility, and that will pay off for future administrations. So when I become governor next year, I will have a state $23 billion less in debt than the state government that Governor Snyder took the helm of on January 1st, 2011.
This is a big issue, Rick, in terms of we didn't start with having good budgets. I mean, we had to take on some massive deficits, and we worked through that in a thoughtful way to minimize the impacts on people and do the right things so it would create an economy that grew. And that's where I'm very proud, between tax, regulatory reform, budget practices. I mean, we help provide the environment for free enterprise to work, and it's flourishing in West Michigan and across our state. But I tell people, and I do it as a joke, you've heard me say many times, if you really want a cool time to be governor, you should run in 2038. because literally we put in place a payment plan for the state and for all the school systems' retirement obligations. It's like a mortgage. And so I tell people, when you look at future leadership, let's make sure no one messes up that payment plan regardless of anything else. Let's pay our mortgage just like a responsible family and follow through, because it will make a tremendous difference for our future. And very few jurisdictions in our country are doing anything like this. So we should be really proud. And it's great. Brian's been a wonderful partner in making all this happen.
You do bring up an interesting point, because the plans that you lay out or that the legislature lays out are not binding on future governors or legislators. So even though that date is set out there, any number of factors could come into play, including budget pressures, and we're going to start seeing some of those in the next few years, aren't we?
Well, again, you hope there's common sense still. People talk about politics too much, and this is where I've always viewed it as, I view it, we should be doing the right thing, and then you might have to understand there are political ramifications, so you may have to adjust a little bit here or there, but keep your eye on the ball of what's just the smart thing to do. And that's what we've done, and I hope this really comes across to generations in the future. We're doing smart things to help them be successful in the future. I hope they pass that on to generations that haven't been born when they're in charge. And again, I know Brian's going to follow that philosophy, but it needs to sustain for the longer term. Don't we have a responsibility to think about people not even born yet in terms of our decision making today?
There are a lot of things that the next governor will have to deal with, things that you two have had to deal with already and will for the next several months, including infrastructure and water and more. And that's what we're going to talk about when we come back in just a few minutes with the governor and lieutenant governor to the point. Welcome back to the Point. My guests this morning, Governor Rick Snyder, Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley. Thank you both for being here. This kind of stems from your endorsement of the Lieutenant Governor. And while we've talked about some politics, I want to talk about some of the real issues that you have had to deal with, will continue to have to, and whoever the next governor is going to have to deal with. But before I do that, I've got to ask this question. I've been thinking about this. I've never thought of you as a political guy. In fact, I've often thought you thought of politics as a necessary evil to get done what you wanted to get done. A sitting governor of a particular party, when there's going to be a primary, doesn't always make an endorsement. What was that motivation? I mean, you explained why you endorsed him, but they don't always do that, right?
Yeah, I just feel it's the right thing to do. We had someone, a next generation leader from before the time we got elected, be poised to do the right thing, to carry on the tradition of the great accomplishments we made happen. He's done wonderful things. Shouldn't we follow through? It's like a relay race. So I don't view it as politics. I view it as we're in a relay race, not where I'm running across the tape and Michigan's finished. We're still climbing. So it's like, how do I hand off the baton, and I've got the right person to take the baton? Shouldn't I tell people that? So that's not political. I view that as pretty common sense.
If you talk about what you both characterize as the comeback of the state, and it's hard to argue that financially and employment-wise things are much better than they were 8 years ago here in the state. But there have been other challenges, including the water crisis in Flint, infrastructure that continues to be a problem, infrastructure that goes beyond roads and bridges, as we've talked about. Let's talk about that a little bit. I want to get both of you to weigh in, because it's certainly going to come up in the campaign. So what about your response to Flint as an administration, and how does that, again, not to politicize it, but we know it's going to be an issue in the campaign?
Well, I think this is an opportunity for people to really evaluate and contrast what type of leader do you want when you're in the middle of a crisis. Do you want somebody who points fingers and casts blame and looks backward and is all about the past and fighting, or do you want somebody who will be there literally on the ground with people? I moved my office to Flint. I worked day in and day out, shoulder to shoulder with people, rolled up my sleeves and got to work with them, working on the future, things like education and healthcare, on top of infrastructure and economic development and nutrition for kids. I mean, all of these different aspects of that response. Somebody needed to be about the future, and that's the role that I played. And that's what I bring to the table, that type of an approach, to be with people and about the future.
Yeah, to reinforce that, Rick, I mean, when you look at, there are some people that work at me in the Department of Environmental Quality that failed in terms of doing the right thing. I happened at the local level, the federal level, but these people worked at the state. I took responsibility for that, and Brian rallied to the solution. So I think people should view Brian's role in this as very much a positive. It's not running from the problem, it's running to the problem to help provide relief and to provide a good answer to people. And he should be proud of the role he played.
There were those who thought that the state, that thought the governor should have acted more quickly when it came to Flint. Let me ask you this question. Did you respond quickly enough? And, two-pronged question, I apologize for that, was your response to the PFAS, I would say, burgeoning epidemic throughout the state? Certainly, we're very familiar with it here in county, where you immediately set up a task force. Was that part of lessons learned?
Well, the first part's easy. Yeah, obviously it's lessons learned, because I think we're being a leader in the PFAS thing. And I know people are being affected by that, may not always see that perspective, but compared to responses around the country, we're working really hard. And I think we've got a national leadership role in explaining this is a national problem and here are the steps you should be taking. So clearly we learned from that. With respect to the problem itself, again, I wish it never would have happened. It was preventable in so many ways. And so I always look back sort of second guessing, saying, how could you have done something better or different? It's the realities of what took place. But I think we rallied hard to address the problem, help solve the problem, and it's because of great partnership and great people such as Brian helping rally to the solution. I think we've done some very good work to respond to that.
If there is one thing that is a common experience for every elected official in the state of Michigan, is you hear people complain about the quality of the roads. I have a chunk of cement that you delivered some years ago downstairs from one of the bridges, and while more money has been put into the road budget, just this past week you signed a supplemental budget for another $175 million to be pulled forward and put in to the transportation budget. There are those who are calling, in fact you will hear them in the next couple of weeks here on this show, saying, hey, we need more money, because 1.2 billion when we finally get there is not going to cut it. It's too little, it's too slow. You've heard all of the arguments. Where are we on, and let's just stick for now to road infrastructure. I want to get to the stuff underground in a minute, but where are we on infrastructure, and do we need to do more, and can we afford to?
Well, we always have to look to improve, no matter where we're starting. But with respect to roads, we've worked for years in getting a solution for our roads. The $1.2 billion is part of that solution. We've also reduced the debt that the previous administration took on. We were left with, they spent all the money from the money that they borrowed, and then we're left with the debt payments. But now that we've reduced that, more of the current gas tax dollars can go to fixing roads. On top of that, we're being more efficient, particularly with the integrated asset management plan, the pilots that we have going in some of our major markets, and getting ready for a statewide strategy of making sure that repair and maintenance and replacement of infrastructure and of all the entities that share the right-of-way, that it's done in a coordinated fashion so that everybody is saving money. And at the same time, we've had to make up money that the feds have reduced in terms of their support here in the state. So as we've been increasing the state support, the federal support has been going down. So we've got some lobbying to do as well with the federal government.
Given the narrow margin that Republicans have in the Senate, and given the current atmosphere in Washington, getting a meaningful infrastructure bill out of Washington, D.C., at least to me, and perhaps I'm a little cynical about these things, but it seems to me that would be a pretty heavy lift. Depending on what happens in the 2018 elections, it could be even more difficult. Is it realistic to think the federal government is actually going to come up with something that's going to help backfill?
I wouldn't assume that, but that's where it's important. Just as Brian said, if you look at, we dealt with 20 years of neglect, and you have that piece of concrete. So you know I've been on this topic relentlessly for a number of years. In fact, we had a ballot proposal our citizens voted down to put money towards roads just 2-3 years ago. We came back with a legislative solution we put in place to get us that 1.2. Well, is it going to solve every problem? No, but it's a big step forward. And as Brian said, I would emphasize it's not just about the amount of money, it's spending it smarter. This integrated asset management pilot, which West Michigan has been an awesome partner in doing, that's a great illustration. A great project I tell people to think about is we did Flex Route project between Ann Arbor and Brighton on US 23. The traditional answer is we have traffic congestion, so you build another lane each way. That would have cost $400 million. We got smarter. Let's make it a smart highway that ties into autonomous and connected vehicles. Let's use the shoulders for part of the day, 2 or 3 hours each way. It cost under $100 million. Isn't this the kind of work we should be thinking about? So while we're thinking about how we have to invest more, let's invest smarter and show a better return, and recognize you can't do something every 20 years. You have to do that on an ongoing basis each and every year, because it's not going to get solved overnight, and with any kind of solution. We're going to have to work at this every day and every year because our climate is such where it's a recurring problem. Let's get better, though.
Hasn't been that long ago when they were doing some road work and replacing some sewer lines in Grand Rapids, and they were digging up wooden pipes under the ground. And there are still, I'm told, cities in this state that have some infrastructure that is still wooden, and much of it, if it's not wooden, it's old. A lot of it's decaying and crumbling, and it's, my words, at an alarming rate considering that it's going to deteriorate more quickly as we go, because it's old. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. That comes with a hefty price tag by your own estimation, a report that you had done. How quickly do you think the state can mobilize to start addressing some of that, because individual municipalities can't do it by themselves?
Well, we've started mobilizing. That work already began, and a great illustration, everything you said is absolutely correct. It is well stated, Rick. I'll use when we put in the Q line in Detroit, that light rail system, that was Woodward Avenue. There is no piece of road in the state of Michigan that's got older, more challenging infrastructure than Woodward. It's the oldest street in the state in many respects. So when we went back and did that work, we actually said, let's do it right. So we coordinated with everyone to do this integrated asset management. It made a huge difference in the project. And we actually did a computerized record, all this new technology to virtual reality so you can see everything underground. And it's amazing. So you can see water and sewer, you can see electric, you can see all this thing. And when they were doing it, they went back to get all the blueprints the way they used to have to do it. So they had to gather up all that information. They had a set of blueprints. And on one of the blueprints, there was a note written about making sure you feed the horses. True story. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff people were working with. Now we can do it in some virtual fashion where they can see every piece of infrastructure, they can see where it's at, they can see the age, they can see when it's going to have to be replaced. Now, we can't do that overnight in every place of Michigan, but isn't it great to say we're already doing it? And again, the West Michigan area is one of the pilot areas. They're doing that work now about how do you coordinate hundreds of groups together to work together.
Going forward, that's going to be an issue, and it's going to happen maybe on a time schedule that's set by government and maybe not. I mean, some city could run into a problem tomorrow that would demand some kind of emergency action. How difficult is that going to be to deal with going forward?
Well, first of all, being proactive and getting to problems before they become emergencies becomes more and more important as infrastructure ages. So having the protocols in place in really understanding what is underground, what are the conditions that we're faced with in each area, and then having a straightforward plan in order to replace it. You're still going to have a system where, for the most part, the users of the system are paying for the ongoing maintenance and replacement and updates of the system. But because it's underground, it's easy to just put it off one more year and put it off one more year, and that's the mindset or the mentality we really have to get away from. This being proactive and having the infrastructure that provides the type of services that our people need and deserve is paramount. It's so important for both quality of life and safety. It's important for our economy to grow like we need it to. We're talking about water and sewer infrastructure, but it's also electrical infrastructure and communications infrastructure, and on top of the surface transportation system. There are a lot of different types of infrastructure out there, and all of them need to be working well to give our citizens the type of lifestyle that they need.
Go ahead.
No, this goes back to the whole point of fiscal responsibility. Just like I talked about paying that debt off, you got to pay it each and every year. You can't say, okay, we're going to skip a payment. We had this when I took office. And a great illustration were our armories, for our National Guards people, the people protecting us, the people we were asking to go fight wars for us. When we looked at our armories, we had leaking roofs, we had terrible facilities. They hadn't done regular maintenance on this stuff, Rick, for our soldiers and our airmen. And so we now have a system in place to make sure we do that regular maintenance. They deserve that kind of respect. But we need to do it in all these areas to say, don't just see some up and down come or say you want to do something else so you shortcut it or not do it. It's not exciting things to keep track of as ongoing maintenance, recurring maintenance, but it's important stuff that makes a difference in people's lives.
Governor Rick Snyder, Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley, thank you both so much for your time. We are completely out of time. I'll be back with closing note in just a moment. If there were any question that the race for governor is on, there is no question any longer. Already on this program, we've talked to all of the major candidates running for governor, from Republican and Democrat, even some independents and third-party candidates, and we will continue that conversation between now and primary right on into the general election. We hope you'll join us every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock as we look at the important decisions you'll have to make in Decision 2018, and we'll keep an eye on what's going on in Washington and Lansing. We'll see you next Sunday morning. To the point.